Imagine working, I don't know, 80 hours a week for your entire adult life. You sacrifice your sleep, your peace of mind, maybe even your relationships, all to build something monumental.
Right, just completely pouring yourself into it.
Yeah, exactly. You follow every rule, you do everything your culture or your industry or even your religion tells you is like truly excellent work. You reach the absolute pinnacle of success.
You're convinced you're a pillar of society at that point.
Completely convinced. And then at the very end of it all, the universe evaluates the actual objective footprint of your whole existence and calculates your net worth as exactly zero.
Wow. Yeah, just nothing.
Nothing. A complete evolutionary void. Like, that is the terrifying premise we were looking at today. It just subverts every comforting narrative we have about, effort and reward.
It really does. It's a very jarring concept to start with.
It is, because usually when you talk about a medical diagnosis, there's this comforting expectation of precision, right? Like you break your arm, the doctor puts you in an x-ray machine, and the film comes out showing that jagged white line.
Right. The doctor just points at it and says, there it is. That's the fracture.
Exactly. It's clean, it's binary, and it's undeniable. You're either broken or you're not broken.
We crave that visibility, I think. We want our categories of success and failure or, good and bad to be as obvious as a fractured bone on a screen.
But the moment you step out of the hospital and into the realm of human psychology or societal development, that x-ray machine just shatters.
Oh, yeah. The landscape gets incredibly murky.
Super murky, especially when we tackle massive loaded concepts like morality, civilizational success, or, and this is really the core of our deep dive today, the concepts of like sin and virtue.
And that muckiness is exactly what the source material today is targeting. We are stepping into a radically different diagnostic framework here.
Right, so for you listening, let's set up the sources. We are diving into Lecture 7 out of a 9-part series from the Tully Easlong Digital Audio Archive.
Yes, specifically, it's an in-depth, really philosophical analysis of Surah Al-Kahf, focusing on verses 103 through 106, delivered by the scholar and philosopher Allama G.A. Parwez.
And the mission here, just to be clear, is not to recount some traditional religious sermon. If you are listening to this expecting like passive moralizing about sinners going to a fiery hell and good people going to the clouds.
We are stripping all of that completely away.
Completely. Parwez's analysis reads way more like a diagnostic autopsy of wasted human labor.
Yeah, he's looking at systemic self-delusion. He's exploring the actual physics of social evolution and the economic mechanics of human action.
So we're looking at an ancient text strictly through the lens of structural reality and universal laws. No magic, no arbitrary judgments.
Right. But to do that, we have to really brace ourselves, because the text starts by redefining the very nature of failure. Well, when society traditionally imagines losers or sinners, the mental image is almost always of the overtly corrupt, right? We picture lazy individuals, mobsters.
Right, thieves. Or the obvious villains who wake up every morning fully aware that they are causing harm, like the guy twirling his mustache.
Exactly. We equate failure with a lack of effort or deliberate embrace of malice, like a corrupt executive actively deciding to dump toxic waste into a river.
We think of going astray as someone who willingly walked off the path.
But Parwez points out that Ayat 103 and 104 are not targeting the lazy or the cartoonishly evil at all.
Wait, really? Then who is it targeting?
The text aims its diagnostic lens at a far more terrifying demographic. It targets the diligent, the highly motivated visionary.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, the brilliant corporate titans, and crucially, the deeply devout religious zealots.
Okay, that is a jarring pivot. What is the actual phrasing in the text?
The phrasing is chilling in its precision, honestly. It asks to identify those who are the absolute greatest losers in respect to their deeds. The Arabic term used here is Al-Akhsaroon amala. And the answer the text provides is those whose efforts went astray in the life of this world while they thought they were doing excellent work.
While they thought they were doing excellent work. Man, that is the phrase that just stops you in your tracks.
It really is.
We are talking about a lifetime of intense, exhausting, highly disciplined labor that completely misses the mark. It's the horror of the diligent loser.
Yes. You spend decades climbing the ladder only to reach the top and realize the ladder was leaning against the completely wrong wall.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
But how does that happen? How does an entire lifetime of intense effort yield absolutely nothing of permanent value?
Well, Parwez forces us to examine the foundational operating systems of human behavior here. He contrasts two distinct philosophies of life that govern literally everything we do.
Okay, what's the first one?
The first is what he terms the materialistic concept of life.
Now wait, we have to clarify Parwez's use of materialism here for you listening. Because in, modern colloquial terms, we use that word to describe someone who's just obsessed with buying expensive sports cars or designer watches.
Right. Just consumerism.
Yeah, but Parwez isn't talking about mere consumerism, is he? He's talking about strict philosophical materialism.
Exactly. He's referring to the foundational view that human existence is exclusively biological.
Just meat and chemistry.
Yes. The text actually traces this biological imperative all the way back to early Greek philosophers like Democritus, noting that this framework has dominated the vast majority of human history.
So if you view a human being simply as a highly evolved animal-like, qualitatively the same as a chimpanzee, but quantitatively different because of a larger prefrontal cortex,
Then the ultimate purpose of human life shrinks to match that purely biological definition.
it just becomes a really sophisticated game of Darwinian survival.
Precisely. It's about the preservation of the physical self, the imperative to procreate, and the accumulation of resources to ensure security against a hostile environment.
Right, and if that biological survival is your entire framework, then the ultimate goal of all your human systems, your politics, your economics, your social contracts, is simply to maximize physical comfort for yourself and your tribe.
And in that jungle, the concepts of objective good and objective evil just evaporate completely. What matters is leverage and power.
The means are entirely justified by the ends.
Exactly. Parwez argues from the text that if an individual or a nation can secure ultimate biological and social comfort through the exploitation of others, the materialistic framework declares them the winner.
Because they survived. They accumulated the most.
Yes, but then Parwez introduces the counter-framework, which he calls the Quranic concept of life.
And this hinges on introducing an entirely separate element to the human equation, doesn't it?
It does. He argues that humans are not just physical bodies driven by the thermodynamics of biology. There's an additional non-physical reality.
The human personality, or the self.
Right. The text refers to it as the kuti, and the recognition of this kuti is the pivot point of his entire analysis.
So how does the kuti differ from the biological self?
Well, according to Parwez's reading, our physical bodies are absolutely subject to physical laws. We need to consume calories, we age, and eventually our biology decays and returns to the earth.
Standard physical reality.
Yeah. But this human personality, this kuti, operates on a different plane. It requires an entirely different form of nourishment to evolve.
It doesn't grow by eating food.
No, and it doesn't grow by hoarding capital either. It grows, develops, and integrates through actions and deeds that align with permanent, universal values.
Okay, let's drill down to the actual mechanics of that growth, because I think this is where the physics of his argument really takes shape. How exactly does an action nourish this intangible kuti?
Parwez's framework suggests that the kuti acts almost like a muscle of human consciousness. But it only metabolizes actions that contribute to the permanent preservation and elevation of humanity as a whole.
Okay, so like acts of justice or equity.
Yes. When you perform an act of genuine equity, justice, or selfless contribution, that action is structurally compatible with the kuti. It integrates into your personality.
You get more robust.
Exactly. It becomes more capable of surviving beyond the physical limitations of biology.
But what if you perform an action driven purely by fear or greed?
Then that action is biochemically incompatible with the kuti. It might feed your biological bank account, but it starves and degrades your human personality.
Which brings us right back to the absolute tragedy of zero.
Right.
Because if you spend your entire life operating purely on that materialistic framework, let's say you build a massive technological monopoly. Or, and we really need to look closely at this, you build a massive religious empire.
Right, with giant megachurches or sprawling institutional networks.
Yeah. You might be completely convinced you're successful. You might look at your organization and genuinely think you are saving humanity.
But if every ounce of that effort was fundamentally driven by a desire for power, security, and resource accumulation,
then none of it nourished the kuti.
none of it. When your physical life ends or when your civilization eventually collapses, the universe evaluates the footprint of your existence.
And your physical achievements, the skyscrapers, the bank accounts, the real estate, that all just stays here to rust and decay.
while your kuti, which was the only element capable of permanent preservation, is found to be starved, undeveloped, or completely deteriorated.
It's the definition of systemic bankruptcy. You exhausted your lifespan thinking you were doing brilliant work, and the final tally is literally an evolutionary void.
It's a very bleak, very structural way of looking at it.
But hold on, I have to push back here on something, because Parwez makes a massive statistical claim in the text.
The 77%, yes.
He brings up this rhetorical figure, suggesting that 77% of humanity is operating in this diluted state, meaning he is lumping the corrupt Wall Street banker and the devout religious zealot into the exact same category.
He is, yeah.
But structurally, their inputs look completely different, right?
Yep.
I mean, one is entirely selfish and focused on quarterly profits, while the other is at least trying to serve a higher power, fasting, praying, following ancient rituals. How does Parwez justify equating the religious ascetic with the ruthless capitalist?
It's a great question. He equates them because he asks us to look beneath the superficial actions. He wants us to look at the fundamental architecture of their motivation.
I could break that down for me.
The source material divides society into two main groups regarding this self-delusion. The first group is obvious: the open atheists, or strict materialists who outright deny anything beyond physical life.
Right, their motives are transparent. They want security now.
Exactly. But then Parwez turns to the massive second group, that 77% figure, who claim to follow a higher religion or a higher moral code.
The ones performing the rituals.
Yes, they perform the rituals, they wear the pious clothing, they adopt the titles. But Parwez argues that, practically and structurally, their underlying philosophy is identical to the first group.
Wait, how is a pious person identical to a materialist?
Ask yourself, why is the zealot praying? Usually to secure a comfortable spot in a physical paradise or to avoid the pain of a physical hell.
Oh, wow.
Right. It's a transactional fear and reward mechanism. Their actual day-to-day decisions are still driven entirely by self-interest, accumulation, and biological security.
They're simply using the vocabulary of religion as a comfortable cloak for their materialism.
Precisely. The banker wants security in this life. The deluded zealot wants security in the next. Both are operating strictly on the axis of self-preservation, which, as we established, starves the kuti.
That is a devastating critique of orthodox piety. I mean, it essentially says that the motivation of avoiding punishment is just biological fear dressed up as holiness.
It's a very harsh mirror to hold up to society.
So if an entire lifetime of incredibly hard work, whether in a corporate boardroom or a monastery, can literally equate to zero if it can all just evaporate, we really need to look at the actual mechanism of this failure.
Right. We need to shift from the psychology of the worker to the actual ledger of the universe.
Exactly. To map that ledger, the text dives deeply into the historical context and the linguistic roots of the Arabic used in the Quran. We mentioned Akhsaroon amala earlier.
Yes. Traditionalists often translate words like kuz, which means loss, as a simple demerit point.
Right. They frame it as a bad grade on a moral report card that some arbitrary judge looks at before sending you to a literal fiery hell.
It's treated like a cosmic traffic ticket. You broke a rule, so you pay a fine in the afterlife.
But Parwez rejects that framework entirely, doesn't he?
Completely. He shifts the concept of kuz firmly into the realm of structural economics and cause and effect physics.
So it's not just a demerit.
No, Kuzer is absolute systemic bankruptcy. It means your entire business model of existence, the fundamental architecture of your life's labor, was flawed. You expended maximum energy and produced a net negative return on the evolutionary scale.
And the text uses another fascinating root word to describe the specific type of deeds these people perform. Sunnah.
Yes. Sunnah. Parwez translates this as artificial goods or manufactured things.
I love this concept. The etymology implies a level of deliberate craftsmanship, right? Like a manufacturing process designed to create an outward illusion.
Exactly. These people are manufacturing artificial good deeds. It's essentially a civilizational PR campaign.
But surely, and I'm playing devil's advocate here, surely feeding orphans or building a hospital, even if done as a PR stunt by a corrupt billionaire, has some objective weight.
You'd think so, right?
Right. The hospital still heals people. How can Parwez claim that artificial deed equals absolute zero?
Because Parwez demands we look at the systemic foundation. If a billionaire exploits thousands of workers, creates systemic poverty, and avoids contributing to the equitable infrastructure of society,
But then builds one hospital and slaps their name on it.
exactly, that hospital is sunnah. It is an artificial good. It exists to launder their reputation and secure their continued power to exploit.
Oh, I see. It doesn't dismantle the system of exploitation. It actually reinforces it by providing the illusion of benevolence.
Yes, the actions have the outward form of virtue, but none of the structural integrity required to actually evolve the human condition. So the net result on the permanent human ledger is still negative.
That distinction between the form of virtue and the structural integrity of virtue leads to what is arguably the most visceral, unforgettable analogy in the entire source text.
The camel analogy.
Yes. Parwez looks at another Arabic root word associated with this wasted effort, habat, and he traces it back to a highly specific veterinary condition in the ancient Arab world called afra.
The way the Quranic metaphors are grounded in these harsh physical realities is just profound when Parwez unpacks them. Walk us through the physiological mechanics of this afra condition.
Okay, so imagine a camel grazing in a really harsh desert environment. It's hungry, it's seeking nourishment. Suddenly, it comes across a patch of lush, green weeds.
To the camel, it looks like a feast.
Exactly, so it gorges itself, it eats continuously. Now, to the untrained eye, perhaps a novice herder, the camel's belly begins to swell beautifully.
The herder looks at the massive animal and thinks, my livestock is robust, incredibly well-nourished, and thriving.
Right, it projects the perfect, undeniable illusion of health and prosperity.
But the underlying chemistry tells a completely different story, doesn't it?
A terrifyingly different story. Those specific green weeds are highly toxic and completely indigestible to the camel's biology.
So it's just mass, not nutrition.
Exactly. The massive volume of food in its stomach never actually breaks down to synthesize into the camel's bloodstream. It never becomes muscle tissue. It never becomes bone.
It simply ferments into toxic gas and useless decaying mass.
And the camel looks absolutely spectacular, completely swollen with intake, right up until the exact second it drops dead from internal poisoning.
It's a devastatingly precise analogy for human labor and societal development.
It really is.
The animal put in massive effort to consume. The belly swelled demonstrably. There was visible, undeniable growth. But because the input was fundamentally incompatible with the body's actual metabolic needs.
The effort wasn't just wasted, it was fatal.
Yes. If we bring the X-ray metaphor from the beginning back into this, it maps perfectly.
Oh, totally. The herder is looking at the outside of the camel and seeing massive success. But if you put that swollen camel in an X-ray machine, the diagnostic image wouldn't show dense, healthy muscle.
The X-ray would just show vast pockets of toxic gas and structural collapse waiting to happen. The outward form is robust, but the internal structure is bankrupt.
And Parwez applies this directly to human societies and massive empires. A civilization can look incredibly wealthy. It can be technologically hyper-advanced.
We can point to a society completely swollen with massive gross domestic product, towering skylines, endless consumer goods, sprawling military bases.
And the citizens look at their society's swollen belly and declare, we are the pinnacle of human thriving.
But if the systemic foundation of that society violates the permanent rights of humanity,
if its GDP is built on the exploitation of the working class or the extraction of resources from weaker nations,
or if it entirely fails to nourish the actual human cootie of its citizens, then all of that staggering labor is chemically unstable.
it is the camel gorging on the toxic weed.
Yes, it's an artificial swelling that is bound to evaporate or brutally collapse under what Parwez calls the law of requital.
The law of requital. Okay, this brings us to the core engine of reason in Parwez's framework. Because the moment you present this harsh reality, that all your hard work might be toxic weeds, the natural human defense mechanism just kicks in.
Oh, immediately.
The immediate follow-up question is always about subjective intention.
Yes, people will say, but what if the billionaire meant well? What if the religious zealot's heart is in the right place?
We are so deeply conditioned to believe that surely if someone is trying their absolute best, if their subjective intention is pure and loving, then all that effort cannot possibly equal zero.
We think the universe must give them a participation trophy for meaning well.
Exactly. But Parwez systematically dismantles this comfort blanket.
He challenges one of the most pervasive myths in both modern spirituality and Orthodox religion. This idea that pure intention possesses some magical property that bends the laws of reality.
In the philosophical framework he outlines, subjective intention means absolutely nothing to the objective laws of physics.
Nothing at all.
Let me adapt an analogy to really ground this concept of structural intention for you listening. Think about civil engineering, but apply it to human society.
Okay, I like where this is going.
Imagine a brilliant, deeply compassionate engineer tasked with building a massive suspension bridge over a dangerous gorge to connect two impoverished towns.
A noble goal.
Very noble. This engineer loves the towns. They pray continuously for the safety of the bridge. They work day and night, putting their literal blood and sweat into the construction. Their intent is unequivocally pure.
B-U-E.
But they completely miscalculate the structural physics. They mess up the mathematical formula regarding the tensile strength of the iron cables required to hold a certain weight.
So the intention is flawless, but the math is fundamentally broken. What happens when the first fully loaded freight train of economic shock or societal stress tries to cross that bridge?
The bridge violently collapses into the gorge, taking the train with it. And here is the brutal, uncompromising truth of the universe. Gravity does not care about the engineer's pure heart.
No, it doesn't.
Physics does not pause to read your corporate mission statement or check the sincerity of your prayers. The laws of nature only check for objective alignment with structural reality.
This is the absolute essence of what Parwez calls the law of requital, or makafat iamal. It is the immutable law of cause and effect applied to human action.
Cause and effect.
Think about it. If you place your bare hand into a roaring fire, the fire will burn your flesh. It does not matter if you placed your hand on the fire with the purest, most loving, most selfless intention imaginable.
The fire doesn't care how you feel.
Exactly. The thermodynamics of the fire operate entirely independently of your subjective emotional state. Parwez's revolutionary argument is that the Quran presents societal, moral, and economic laws in the exact same way.
They are as unforgiving and immutable as gravity. The universe checks for objective alignment, not emotional sincerity.
Right. Just like iron has a measurable tensile strength, a human society runs on the tensile strength of equity, justice, and the equitable distribution of resources.
So if you try to build a society on religious rituals, pure intentions, and charity galas, but you structurally ignore massive wealth inequality and exploitation, your societal iron is brittle.
And when that freight train hits, the society collapses. All the pure intention in the world won't suspend gravity.
Therefore, all these individuals identified as Al-Akhsaroon Amala, those who thought they were doing excellent work, are essentially engineers building bridges out of paper, convinced by the sheer force of their own pure feelings that the paper will hold the weight of a train.
It's a fatal delusion. And Parwez turns a very sharp, highly critical eye toward the religious elite in this regard.
Oh, yeah. Because who is most prone to believing that their intentions or their rituals somehow grant them a magical exemption from the laws of physics and societal cause and effect?
The people who have wrapped themselves in the camouflage of piety. The religious elite often believe that performing a specific ritual with the right intention acts as a shield against the objective consequences of their exploitative economic action.
Which reminds me, there's a darkly humorous, brilliantly illustrative anecdote mentioned in the text about this exact delusion.
The blind woman and the thief. Yes, please share it.
Okay, so it involves a blind woman walking through a busy marketplace, carrying a small bundle of her meager belongings. Suddenly, a thief swoops in, snatches her bundle from her hands, and takes off running.
And she's blind, so she can't see who did it.
Right. But the blind woman immediately starts screaming at the top of her lungs, "Oh, Haji, give me my bundle back. Oh, Haji, stop."
The thief must have been so confused.
He was completely baffled. He stops in his tracks, turns around and asks, "You are completely blind. How on earth did you know I am a Haji?" A Haji being, someone who has completed the sacred pilgrimage and holds an elite religious title.
Right, a symbol of ultimate piety.
And the blind woman replies, "Because only a Haji could possess the audacity to pull off a crime like that."
Wow. It's a bitter, cynical joke.
It is, but the societal diagnostic Parwez is extracting from it is profound. Only someone hiding behind the ultimate camouflage of religious piety, the shiny, unquestionable title of a Haji, could brazenly exploit the vulnerable while maintaining their elite social standing.
They've convinced themselves that their outward rituals give them diplomatic immunity from the actual objective morality of their actions.
Exactly. And the text expands this critique to the performative aspects of entire communities, doesn't it?
It does. It highlights people who broadcast their prayers loudly on 4 different loudspeakers, ensuring every corner of the town hears their devotion.
Very performative.
Very. Yet simultaneously, the very fabric of their society is riddled with corruption, exploitation, hoarding of wealth, and deep immorality. Conditions the text categorizes as fasha and munkar.
The toxic weeds.
Yes. Parwez argues from the text that if the ritual of prayer, or salat, is structurally genuine, its inevitable objective result must be the eradication of corruption in that society.
Because it's cause and effect.
Right. If the society remains deeply corrupt, then the loud prayers are mathematically just artificial deeds. They are the toxic weeds swelling the camel's belly. They have completely failed to produce the required structural outcome.
Which means, according to the law of requital, all of that massive religious effort is yielding an objective return of zero. It is spiritually and societally bankrupt.
Completely bankrupt.
So if we accept this uncompromising law of cause and effect, how does Parwez reinterpret the ultimate religious concept of judgment? Because for millennia, the Orthodox view has warned about meeting the Lord or facing God on Judgment Day.
This is where Parwez's linguistic reframing is most disruptive, I think. The traditional reading of the phrase "liko rababin," meeting their Lord, paints a highly anthropomorphic picture.
The guy with the white beard in the clouds.
Exactly. It envisions a literal physical courtroom in the clouds. God is situated on a throne, acting as a magistrate. The human defendant is brought forward. A physical ledger is opened.
And arbitrary, subjective verdicts are handed down based on God's mood or, the intercession of saints. The cosmic principal's office. You just hope you catch the principal on a good day.
Right. But Parwez dismantles the courtroom completely. Based on the law of requital, liko rabemim does not mean a physical meeting with a deity.
What does it mean then?
It means finally confronting the inescapable ultimate consequences of your own actions. It is the moment the freight train hits the structurally unsound bridge. It is the moment reality violently asserts itself over your lifelong delusion.
You cannot outrun the physics of your own choices.
You cannot. And the text identifies the Kafirun in Ayat 105 in this context.
Traditionally translated simply as disbelievers.
Right. Yes, but Parwez analyzes the root of kuf, which means to cover up, to conceal, or to deny. The Kafirun are exactly those individuals who actively try to cover up or deny these universal laws.
The ones who think the laws of physics don't apply to them.
Exactly. They believe their elite status, their hoarded wealth, or their loud artificial rituals grant them immunity from cause and effect. They deny that their exploitative actions have permanent structural consequences on their own kuti and on the fabric of humanity.
Let's pull Ayat 105 into the center of the discussion here, because this shifts our focus from the psychological delusion to the ultimate final evaluation.
The final tally.
Right. If subjective intention does not matter, and if artificial deeds evaporate like toxic gas in the camel's stomach, what actually happens when the final tally of human history is taken? Ayat 105 states definitively, we will not assign to them any weight on the day of standing.
We will not assign to them any weight. This is perhaps the most devastating civilizational conclusion in the entire analysis.
Because, again, we have to contrast this with Orthodox traditionalism, which often imagines a giant set of literal wooden scales, a tarazu floating in the sky, where an angel places your individual good deeds on the right side and your bad deeds on the left to see which way the scale tips.
But Parwez is pointing out the absolute logic of the text. There is no need for a massive scale to weigh the deeds of the diligent loser.
Why not?
Because there is literally nothing left to weigh. The mass is zero.
Wow. Let's return to the biology of the camel for a second. If a veterinarian wanted to measure the actual healthy, dense muscle mass the camel gained from eating acres and acres of those toxic weeds, they wouldn't need to put the camel on a scale.
The answer is biologically zero. The weeds never integrated into the body.
In the exact same way, these artificial materialistic actions, no matter how grand the empires or how loud the prayers, never integrated into the development of the human kuti.
Therefore, when the final ledger of human evolution is examined, their weight is non-existent.
To have no weight, no wazn, as the Arabic text specifies, means that in the grand overarching ledger of history, your society's entire existence is treated as evolutionary white noise. It's just a dead end on the human family tree.
What is truly fascinating here is applying this concept of wazn on a macro civilizational level. Parwez implicitly references the sweep of history here.
Like ancient empires.
Yes, you can look at the pharaohs or the Babylonian kings or even modern hyper-capitalist empires. They've built vast monuments. They possessed unmatched military might and staggering economic output.
Huge outward swelling.
Huge. But if all of that massive infrastructure was driven purely by the materialistic concept of life, if it was just highly organized, technologically advanced animal survival that violently exploited the weak and entirely failed to elevate human potential, it possesses no permanent evolutionary weight.
It contributed absolutely nothing to the permanent preservation of humanity.
Nothing. And because a civilization lacks that fundamental structural weight, it is eventually, inevitably ground into dust by the tectonic plates of historical cause and effect. The universe simply discards it as a failed experiment.
Man, this brings us to the ultimate realization for you, the listener. This is the core economic truth of Parwez's diagnosis. It's the realization of the earthly casino.
The earthly casino, yes.
Because you absolutely can get a massive return on investment in the purely material world. Parwez notes in the text that physical laws are completely neutral. If you understand the science of agriculture, if you plow the earth, plant the seeds, and irrigate them correctly, the earth will yield a crop.
The soil does not check if the farmer is a devout believer or a staunch atheist. It only checks if the physical laws of agriculture were followed.
Exactly. If you follow the rules of capitalism ruthlessly, you will likely get rich.
Cause and effect operate flawlessly in the material realm.
But here is the terrifying catch. If that material return was all you aimed for, if your entire life's focus, your 80-hour work weeks, were just about securing that crop, that executive promotion, that massive bank balance, and that earthly power, you cannot then turn around and demand a return in the currency of permanent human evolution.
You already went to the earthly casino, played the game, and cashed out your chips.
You got exactly what you worked for. But it all evaporates the exact moment your biology fails or your civilization collapses because you invested zero capital in the eternal cootie. You achieved total material success and total evolutionary bankruptcy.
Which brings Parwez's diagnosis to its terminal climax. We have just walked through a methodical, uncompromising autopsy of the self-deluded empire.
We've examined the diligent loser, the individual and the society that works itself to the point of exhaustion for absolutely zero evolutionary weight.
The diagnosis is systemic, unavoidable bankruptcy based on the immutable laws of nature.
And the natural question, the question I know you listening are practically screaming at your device right now, is about the cure.
Right. If the diagnosis is terminal, what's the treatment?
Exactly. If a lifetime of intense labor can evaporate into nothingness simply because it is based on a subjective materialistic delusion, what does the alternative actually look like? How does an individual or an entire society build a system that achieves infinite permanent weight in this evolutionary matrix?
Well, that demand for a cure is exactly where the entire surah reaches its grand architectural design.
So there is hope.
Oh, absolutely. Parwez does not leave us with just a teardown. In Lecture 8 of this 9-part series, which covers the magnificent concluding verses of Ayat 107 through 110, he pivots from diagnosis to construction.
We are going to look at the absolute blueprint of the cure.
We are going to analyze genital furtus.
And spoiler alert for the listener.
Yep.
It is not going to look anything like what traditional stories have told you.
Not even close. Parwez strips away the mythological imagery of genital furtus as a celestial garden of endless pleasure where people just sit passively on clouds eating grapes.
So what is it then?
He redefines it, based on the linguistic roots of the text, as a highly active, sustainable, high-production, and infinitely stable civilization right here in reality.
A physical civilization.
Yes. A civilization fundamentally built on the principles of open scientific inquiry, the shared abundance of resources without exploitation, and absolute legislative sovereignty aligned entirely with universal laws.
Wow.
Next time, we will map exactly how humanity can build that sustainable future.
I cannot wait to dive into that blueprint. It is the necessary construction after such a devastating demolition. But before we go today, I want to leave you, the listener, with a final provocative thought to sit with.
Something to mull over.
Yes. We started this discussion by talking about the incredibly muddy waters of human self-delusion and how terrifyingly easy it is to trick ourselves into believing our efforts are structurally sound simply because our outward bellies are swollen with endless activity.
The camel and the toxic weeds.
Exactly. So I want you to pull out your actual calendar tomorrow morning. Look at the tasks, the endless meetings, the ambitious projects, and even the daily rituals you are pouring your precious, finite life energy into.
It's audit time.
It is. I want you to ask yourself the hard, uncompromising physics question. In the grand ledger of human existence, are you building permanent structural weight that aligns with the evolution of humanity? Or are you just feeding the camel toxic weeds that will only make it swell with illusion right before it collapses? Think about it.
It might be the most uncomfortable, but ultimately the most vital audit you will ever perform on your own life.
Thank you for joining us on this exploration. Remember, true knowledge is rarely found in the comfortable answers we tell ourselves. It's found by questioning everything you thought you knew and rigorously checking the structural math of your own existence. We will see you next time.